What is the Bible? How did the Bible come into existence? Understanding the answer to these questions are more important than any other topic that we could discuss here at this channel. The Book of Enoch, angels, and all the intriguing supernatural aspects of the Bible mean nothing unless we understand this first. The Bible has captivated millions for well over 2,000 years. There's no other book like it. But unfortunately, many Christians like myself were initially deceived about what the Bible actually is. As a Christian, my only relation to the text is through our King Jesus. Jesus directly identified himself with the unified narrative of the Hebrew Bible. In this fascinating series, we are going to explore the documented and historical origins of the Bible. We will see the well-documented editorial history of the Bible is not a scandal, but rather a proof of the provision and protection of God and His Word. As always, it's important for us to start at the beginning. We've got so much fascinating material to discover together. Stay tuned, my friends. The beginning is needed.
I think we're circling around, and I love this about you. We're circling around to a theme that has come up every other month, the whole history of our conversation, which is about that God, to be a Christian and to believe that God speaks to us in these texts that lead to the person of Jesus. I don't believe Jesus is a figment of my imagination, nor is he just like a literary figure. He was an actual person. But Jesus of Nazareth appealed to these texts and this story as the story that gave the framework for who he was and what he was doing. And what does that story do? Well, we've just talked about it. So it's training you to see the world a certain way. However, the God of this story is so committed to working and being present in the world, in and through humans and their language and their culture, that what God wants to communicate will only happen through that language and cultural forms. And so this story is written in ancient Hebrew. So I don't think that's a struggle for you necessarily.
That it's written in an ancient language?
Yeah. So the fact that this story is communicating through ancient Near Eastern ritual symbolism of sacred tents and sacred mountains and animal sacrifices and priests, like this is all thoroughly incarnate of ancient Near Eastern culture that Israel was a part of. And so you're struggling with that symbolism. Like, is it just a symbol or is it real, right? Isn't that what you're struggling with? Is the narrative just giving me symbols, or is it real? And but it's the same question in a different way of saying, how is it that God could speak to every person of every time through texts that are written in ancient Hebrew, that's like ancient Semitic language? And I think we're just here at the brink of a mystery that's at the heart of a Jewish, Christian, theistic view of the world, which is for God to reveal anything about God's self to us through human thought forms. It will inevitably use categories of human culture and language and live within the limits of those. This is very theoretical, but I feel like it's a major theme in our conversations over the years, and I struggle with it too.
I think inerrancy relates to the trustworthiness and reliability of the truth propositions being given to the reader and the recounting. In other words, I look at inerrancy as sort of being reliable when it comes to historical matters. Okay, because to me that's a good word and a workable word, trustworthy and reliable, because it doesn't overclaim. Okay, I'm not going to use a term that would suggest that we might not learn something in the future, or that there might be a different or better way of understanding this or that thing, because again, we're dealing with limited data and whatnot. But when the biblical writer is writing this down, recording whatever he's recording, I think his entire intent is to be reliable in the things he's recounting. But I will say it's not going to conform in certain respects to what we would expect a historian today to do, or historians today would expect to do. And my own view is that that's unnecessary. It is unnecessary for me to take my modern context of how we do history and impose it on the biblical writer and then judge the results according to the failure to live up to my standard that I imposed. I think that's wrong-headed. You know, for me to call something an error in Scripture, it would have to be something that there's really just no other way, there's no other conclusion to draw. You know, he said A and it's B, you know, and there's really no sort of getting out of it. It's a mistake or something like that. But you realize, you know, when you get into this discussion, for instance, is the Bible allowed to use approximations? Let's just take numbers, for instance. Okay, like there's a particular battle in the Old Testament. One you know, accounting says 24,000 died. Another one says like 23,000 some, or what, you know, like, is it okay if the writer uses a round number? He rounds off. Is that a sin? Is that an intent to deceive? Is it an intent to falsify? Okay, so all these considerations, it's hard to just give one sentence for inerrancy because you have all these qualifications. Is the biblical writer allowed to use the language of appearances? We do this every day. The sun rose. No, it didn't. I mean, it's an expression that everybody understands, but it's scientifically inaccurate. But it's acceptable within our culture. So is the biblical writer allowed to use these sorts of things and write from a perspective that doesn't conform to modern science? I mean, you already know my answer to this. This is why I distinguish between truth, propositions, and the means by which propositions are expressed. Okay, the means by which propositions are expressed are going to be things that, from our perspective, don't reflect the tools that we have of scientific inquiry. So I'm not going to impose my context, my knowledge base of the natural world on this ancient person, because I don't think the truth proposition is to tell me, oh, Genesis 3, let's discuss snake anatomy. You know, let's discuss the zoology of snakes, or I don't think that's the point at all. I think the truth proposition being given to us is something theological that helps frame the history of Israel or salvation history in general or whatever. And these are the means by which the writer is trying to do that. That's his goal. The truth propositions are the goal, not the way he's trying to express it. Because this can change. This is sort of a human thing. It's who the person is. Okay, it's not something, again, that transcends. So that's the way I look at inerrancy. I don't think, I've not come across anything that I would consider, you know, just an out and out error. I mean, there are things that you have to wonder about and sort of suspend, you know, judgment, like in the past. And we can all come up with these sorts of things, like Quirinius is kind of a famous problem, the census of Quirinius and Luke. There are good explanations as to how that can be historically plausible. There's a couple of them. Now, I don't know if either one of those are right, or if there's another way that'll come along down the pike that would be better. But I can't conclude, since there are possibilities of showing, you know, that he's accurate here, I can't conclude that it's an error, even if we can't nail down which, you know, what explanation is best here. So that's the kind of thing where, okay, we'll just sit on it. We'll sit on it. Now I believe that, we're going to have, when these sorts of situations apply, in the past, things have come to light that have settled questions. You don't realize this, but at the turn of the 20th century, scholars made fun of the Bible all the time because of its mention of Hittites, in Canaan. The Bible's a funny document. Look at that. Who's the idiot that wrote that? Well, yeah, until we found source material that had Hittites in Canaan. This is what you get. So you have, again, the flow of history at times will produce answers to these sorts of things. And since that's been the case in the past, I'm gonna say, okay, Quirinius could be historical for one of these two explanations could work. I don't know if these are the best answers or not. Maybe something better will come along, but there you go. I can't conclude that Luke is wrong. That would be overclaiming and really misclaiming the data.
We need your help. Ring Them Bells is a nonprofit organization where every dollar donated goes right back into the mission of spreading the good news and helping those in need. The main ministry of Ring Them Bells is serving those in need in the name of our King Jesus. We create pop-up feeding centers all across the United States to help feed the homeless. We also specialize in hurricane relief. We go into the hardest hit areas. We bring free cooked food. We bring important supplies. We're going to bring prayer to these people, and most importantly, we bring hope to those in need. And you can help with this. Over the past year, we have fed over 2,000 meals, and next year, we want to double that. We can't do this without your support. Everything we create here and all of the food that we serve is free because it's paid for by generous viewers just like you. If you feel led to donate and join the mission with us here at Ring Them Bells, click the Give Butter link in the notes and comments of this video. For anyone who donates monthly, we want to say thank you. We're going to mail you out some swag. You're going to be joined into our exclusive Bells Angels Club, where you'll get swag and exclusive content that no one else gets. If you can't support us financially, please continue to like and share the content, as this helps us so much with spreading the good news about what Jesus has done for our world. God is growing this community in ways that I could never imagine, and I am so grateful to be a part of this with you. We are literally just getting started here, folks. Stay tuned. The beginning is near.
So did God, a fusion reaction that wasn't contained actually come take up residence in a tent in the middle of the Sinai desert? Isn't that kind of what you're asking? Like, was it actually real?
Well, I guess I'm assuming that these stories are rooted in Israel's actual history.
Yeah. Yep. And I think the narrative is inviting us to trust that claim.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with that assumption,
yep,
then I ask myself, in what sense, would an animal sacrifice actually atone for sin? In what sense would the priests putting on this bedazzled thing actually protect them from God's holiness?
Yeah.
Only in the sense that they're doing a pretend thing, and God's saying the pretend thing is going to work.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. That's it right there. And so it's God accommodating himself to human language, cultural practices, and thought patterns.
Yeah.
It's incarnation. It's God inhabiting human culture to reveal and communicate Torah, teaching and instruction. Yeah, I think that's where you logically have to go to buy any of this.
Yeah, okay. And I think that's helpful to set the stage, because we're going to get into a lot of stuff that I think I'm going to constantly be going, this is so weird and ridiculous. And how does that work? Why would that even work? And it's helpful for me to be able to just say, I'm going to turn that off, because what matters is the Torah, the instruction. What is this teaching me about God and God's nature, and about being in a relationship with God, and the solutions that God has for the crisis that we've created?
So, the divine court scene appears in all different parts of the Bible, in the Torah, in the prophets, in the Psalms, in Job, and it appears in the New Testament as well. in John the visionary in the Revelation. John sees the heavenly throne room and with the creatures and so on. So here's something that's really interesting, is that all of the imagery in all of those different passages has strong parallels to depictions of the divine realm in the cultures of Israel's neighbors, of divine courtrooms, of divine courtiers or spiritual beings that look very similar to what the cherubim are described as looking at. Actually, if you could just Google, like, in modern day Iraq, they have this, this big build out of how they restored a part of ancient Babylon, and these guardian creatures that the kings of Babylon placed at the gates were these multiform animal winged creatures with human faces and so on. They're called the Lamassu statues. They're really cool looking. And they look almost exactly like what cherubim looked like as they're described in the Bible. So this is interesting, is that the biblical authors used the imaginative framework that they had, and when they encountered the divine realm, that's what they saw and experienced. And that used to bother me, and I guess maybe it still does a little bit. But one other thing that became really noticeable to me was that every time that this divine court is described in all of these different visions and scenes throughout Scripture, Old and New Testaments, it's always a little bit different. The creatures look different. Sometimes they have 2 wings, sometimes they have 4, sometimes they have 6. Sometimes they're glowing, sometimes they're on fire, sometimes they're smoking. And so I think what we're up against here is the fact that God has chosen to communicate through humans. Like, the Scriptures are the products of people. And the Bible is not bashful about this fact. It actually tells us about the writing of many of the scrolls by people in the books themselves. And so, in a way, the question is similar to the fact is, does God speak Aramaic? Well, Jesus of Nazareth spoke Aramaic. Does that mean that God speaks Aramaic? Well, no, Jesus spoke Aramaic. Are you with me? It's actually just a different version of the same question. Every time that God is going to interface with humans, it's going to be in the form of human language, imagination, and cultural expression. And what that doesn't mean is that Isaiah or John the visionary didn't actually encounter something. But the thing that he encountered was interpreted by his brain, given the cultural and imaginative framework that he had. And the same is true for me. And that doesn't mean it's not real. If anything, what we're trying to say is whatever the presence of God is, it's more real than anything you could ever imagine. And it can only be captured in human words and imagination, given the fact that, I'm not God, and so I'm going to describe it with the language and categories that I have. I'm sorry, this is a really big question. But to me, the divine court scenes in the Bible raised this question for me a long time ago, and so I care about it. And I think it's an important one because it really forces us to reckon with the nature of the Bible as a product of both divine and human initiatives partnered together. So here's one way to think about it. When I was in high school, I took a lot of theater classes. And I remember my drama teacher on the first day was talking about how theater, walking into a theater or stage play, and the curtain raises and the story begins. And he introduced me to this famous phrase by the philosopher Samuel Taylor Coleridge. But he's the one who introduced this phrase, the willing suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
When you enter into a stage play, what you're not supposed or a movie. Yeah, what you're not supposed to think is, well, none of this really happened, so it can't say anything.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get anything out of this.
Right.
You willingly suspend your disbelief, and you inhabit the story on its own terms. And then you walk away from that changed and shaped by it. And so I do think there is crucially important question that we all have to ask about the way that the biblical narratives refer to real history and the truthfulness of that representation. But there's also an element, especially as modern readers, I think, to hear the biblical story on its own terms, we have to take a cue from Coleridge here. and willingly suspend our disbelief so that we can at least sympathetically hear what's being communicated here. What I have found in my teaching experience is when you invite people into a willing suspension of disbelief, when they read the biblical story, and all of the stuff in Leviticus is going to be a great example of an opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Well, what I found is when you invite people to read and inhabit the story that way, over time, most people in my experience don't end up thinking this is all ancient, primitive hogwash. They actually find it deeply compelling and illuminating of their own life experience.
Yeah.
But it does it through an ancient Hebrew narrative and ancient Semitic ritual symbolism and practice.
Yeah. Yep. That's helpful.
It's just, there's nothing for it.
We're going to suspend disbelief. But to be clear, the ancients, Aaron's sons and Moses and the Israelites, they weren't suspending disbelief. This was happening. And they weren't, while we would call it play acting in retrospect, they weren't play acting. They were interfacing with
very much real.
The holy.
That's right. Yeah. And I think to be committed to a view that these referred historical events that were real, that they're a truthful representation, means to say that God accommodated God's own presence and power and person into the language, cultural forms, and ancient ritual symbolism of the Hebrew people. Yeah. But to hold in your mind, to hold in suspension this conviction that God revealed himself to Israel through the language and ritual patterns is
of Middle Eastern, Bronze Age.
Yeah, that's right.
Like nomadic tribal people.
Yeah. But
Semitic nomadic tribal people.
It's just a different instance of the same belief that's at work at the core of Christian orthodoxy, which is that God revealed himself in the human person of a guy named Yeshua ben Nazareth, who was an Aramaic-speaking, first-century Jewish man from Galilee.
Yeah.
And that God would accommodate and limit the fullness of God's own being, right, into the localized presence and person of Yeshua ben Nazareth. Or that God would accommodate and limit God's own presence and power to an ancient Bronze Age tent. Right? It's the same actually challenge that we have in both of those cases.
Also that God would commune and limit himself and be present with a 21st century community of Jesus followers.
That's exactly. Yeah. To trust and believe that my local church that I'm a part of plays host to the Spirit of God.
Yeah.
And is somehow an incarnation of the body of Christ and the ministry of Jesus here, right here in East Portland, where I live.
Yeah.
That requires the same amount of trust and the same category in my mind as believing in the incarnation of Jesus or believing in the reality that Israel experienced in this tent. Thank you. Thank you. It's about what story you're living in.
Yeah.
We don't come to reality like neutral and then choose to adopt a story. Like we are inhabiting the narrative about reality from our moment of our earliest consciousness. And the question is, will we entertain new stories that can enrich and challenge our pre-existing assumptions, that can teach us new Torah, new instruction? And that's exactly what the biblical story claims to be. And that is the story being told in all of these ritual sacrifices and offerings and the blood of the animal.
A different story, but also at the same time, the Bible comes with conviction of this is reality.
Yeah.
This is the real story.
That's right. Yep. And there's nothing for it. You got to suspend your disbelief and dive in. You need to remember all biblical literature is ancient literature. This is part of our paradigm.
Yeah, this is ancient literature.
It's ancient literature in its wisdom for all later generations of God's people. So we are not the first audience of these commands. The audience of these commands are ancient Israelites, escaped slaves who were having their identity reformed in the transition between the Bronze and Iron Age, in the ancient Near East. And these laws are dialed into that context. And so to simply copy and paste without doing your cultural background homework is likely lead in the long term, or even in the short term, to, I think, misapplication, misuse of these laws. So It's wisdom literature. There's divine wisdom for all of God's people of any place and any time, but we will hear that wisdom by learning to read these in context, literary context and ancient context. And you can see Jesus doing that, and you can see the Apostle Paul doing that by how they draw upon and quote from this section.
You're talking about Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, especially doing that.
Yeah, that's right.
And Paul, when he did it kind of famously with don't muzzle the ox.
Yeah, he did it by quoting from a law in Deuteronomy about how to treat your animal.
Yeah.
And he takes that as a wisdom reflection on how to compensate leaders in a local house church.
Yeah.
Which then Christians throughout history have taken as wisdom for how to compensate clergy
Yeah.
in other church structures. So we're all using the Bible as wisdom literature. The point is to become hyper aware of it.
Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys are enjoying this series. It has revolutionized how I look at the Bible and how I view myself as a Christian in America. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, share, turn on the alerts for this channel. All those things help us get the message out about what God has done for this world, and we're so excited to have you here along for the journey. This is a community, and I've loved having all the response and all the connection that I've had with you guys across the globe. So thankful you're here. Tune in. Stay tuned, as we always say. The beginning is near. We've got more coming. See you soon.